Hello all. So I'm back and a little chilly in here, so I had to put a sweater on. During this talk, we are going to discuss a strategy. Well, it's really not a strategy. It's a philosophy. It's a way of teaching called differentiated instruction. I really like this opening quote from Howard Gardner, who's a researcher on many educational issues, especially multiple intelligences and how to teach children and meet their individual needs in the classroom and beyond the classroom, really. So let me just take a few minutes and you can pause and listen to this. The biggest mistake of the past centuries in teaching has been to treat all children as if they were variants of the same individual, and thus to feel justified in teaching them all in the same way. So let that sink in for a moment, and you'll kind of begin to understand this as we go through this PowerPoint. Now, this is a long PowerPoint presentation because it includes some very specific examples. I'm going to show you those examples, but this is definitely a presentation that you can revisit. In addition, I have posted a link that includes some additional ideas and information on how to differentiate for children. One of the things that I caution you is that many great differentiated practices come from things labeled for gifted and talented children. Please remember that only 2% of our population is truly gifted and talented. Most of the children, and you can see by walking in front of a door where behind that door is a gifted and talented program, or there's a school for gifted and talented, you will notice most likely most of the children who participate in those programs are from white upper middle class families or families of color from upper middle class families, professionals, parents who have been to college, parents who have had educational opportunities. I often refer to students who do not have those educational opportunities as under-resourced. I clearly remember when I was teaching kindergarten in Lynchburg City that they were taking the children in the gifted and talented program to a play. And it was a play that was designed for children. It was a community play and it was for young children. But only the children in the gifted and talented program got to go. I believe that the play was a combination of some stories that were myths, folk tales, such as Jack and the Beanstalk. I can't remember what some of the other ones, Rapunzel. And I thought, well, those are good stories for any child to go and see. Why just gifted and talented? Why do we tend to take children who go to the plays often with their parents or their grandparents to more plays and leave the children behind to do remediation, which often resulted in more worksheets, which pushed children further and further away from desiring to attend school. So keep that in mind as we talk about differentiation. I really want you to just think about differentiation as for all children, and it specifically is helpful for children who are, I call them, underserved in our public schools. So let's take a look at differentiated instruction. Again, it's a way of thinking. It's the way that the teacher approaches the design and implementation of curriculum lesson planning. And you're really trying to think about your commitment to student differences in the classroom. My core belief is if we could really do this in all of our classrooms, we would have students who liked to go to school. We would have students who were more successful, and that would lead to them performing much better on standardized tests without remediation and without drill and kill. So what is differentiation? And then I'm going to counter that with what differentiation is not. Okay? So think of differentiation is not. It is not this. This is the factory model for education. Our educational system was designed to get more people in the workforce who could work long days, could follow a leader, could work on tasks, stay focused, and be quick with their work. This row is a factory model. Can I work on an assembly line? Can I work in a room full of people, typically then it was women, typing up documents? Those kinds of jobs. Okay, so differentiation isn't. Here are some misunderstandings. It's not a cumbersome technique of individualization. You'll often hear teachers say, I can't differentiate, I don't have enough time to give every child what they need. Well, that's one philosophy. It can be thought of as grouped individualization. You can differentiate with flexible groups, and we'll talk a little bit more about what flexible groups are. It's not giving students all the same work most of the time, even in achievement or ability grouped classes. Okay? Here are some goals for differentiation. To maximize student growth of all the children and to promote individual student success. And you can do that in multiple ways. You can do it one-on-one, you can do it in small groups, you can do it in large groups. And you don't have to do it all at once, all day long. But the more you get used to differentiating, the more you will see the benefits of differentiated instruction. I started in January with a 5th grade class here in Virginia. The class had been drilled and killed. Were basically told that these are children, 95% of them lived in public housing. They basically had been told that school was not for them. They just needed to try to stick it out until they were 16 years old when they could quit. Yes, 9 and 10-year-olds are being told that. We're being told that. Now, this is quite a few years ago, and I hope it doesn't happen anymore. But once I started differentiating in the classroom and I saw how successful those students were being, they performed the best in the city of Lynchburg on the end of the school standardized test. This was before standards of learning. This was a nationally normed standardized test. They performed the best in the city. And every year they published those scores and they ranked the schools as to who was the top school. When this one small community school, 97% Black students, performed the best, it didn't get in the newspaper. I was livid. And when I asked why, the response I got was, well, they just didn't do very well on their computation in the math section, and we're not posting the scores this year. Interesting. Anyway, that was not the end of those conversations either. But a differentiated classroom provides different avenues, different ways for the students to acquire the content they need to know and understand. Because not everyone learns the content in the same way. To process or make sense of the information and the content they're learning and the ideas that they're learning, right? Because we also want them to learn ideas and how other people came up with those ideas and how they process those ideas. And then to develop the products to demonstrate their understanding. So there's many different ways that students can demonstrate their understanding of their knowledge. Okay, so in differentiation, there are 4 elements to this whole process. You can differentiate by content, by process, by product, and by the learning environment itself. They can be done individually. You can blend a couple things together. So if we just quickly go through this, the content, that's what the students need to learn. or how they will get access to the information. So if I'm a student who is very active, right, and it's really hard for me to sit and to read, it might be better for me to watch a video that's humorous and age appropriate on the particular content, right, to access information. My children did this all the time. I have 2 children who are dyslexic. So early reading was a struggle. They were readers, but it took them a long time to read and comprehend the information. And what I started to notice is that the History Channel, the Discovery Channel were extremely popular when my children were in elementary school. And you have to remember, they're adults now. So the History Channel, they tell me, is not really the History Channel anymore. There's not a lot of historical, accurate information on the History Channel. It's more ghost chasing. I haven't seen the History Channel in a while. But they were really soaking in that information. And let me tell you, all of my children are much better with their historical understanding of events than I ever was. In fact, they challenged many a middle school and high school teacher on the accuracy of some of the information that was in the textbooks as it related to historical events, both abroad and here in the United States. The process is the activities in which the student engages in order to make sense or master the content. So for instance, if I'm learning content about the US, okay, I think I may have confused you there. If I'm learning content about the United States, right, I can access that content in different ways. And so the content itself and the process can be similar, but unless I am putting my students into groups, I can offer content that's all the same, or I can offer content on 3 different levels: more advanced content, average level content, and content that's been a little bit lower level, but it's all on the same topic. It could be all the World War I, okay? The process would be watching it on video, listening to it on a tape, reading it from a book, interviewing a World War II, not a World War I, a World War II vet or a child of a World War II vet. The product is the way that I demonstrate my knowledge, so that I practice that knowledge or rehearse it, right? Not memorize, but rehearse. So I do encourage you to use the term rehearse rather than to memorize. If we rehearse something, it tends to stay with us longer. We tend to make connections. We tend to put some emotion to it rather than just to memorize to get an A on the test and then forget it. Apply that knowledge and extend what I have learned over time, right? So I could have students write a play. I could have students write an essay. I could have students build something, make a collage, paint a picture representing something. So the way that, and then present that work and explain how that work represents the American West or something like that. Then the learning environment. This is really important. I think this is probably key, second only to developing relationships with students, is the way that the classroom works and feels. So what's the flow of your classroom? How does the classroom feel? Who owns the classroom, right? You will walk into many classrooms where the teacher says, this is my classroom, these are my materials. In this 5th grade class, when I taught kindergarten as well, when I started telling the students, this is your classroom, these are your materials. And we would have classroom meetings, and I continually reinforced the idea that it was their classroom, and we would have discussions about when things went well and when things were not going well. More of a democratic feel to the classroom. Not that you're being a laissez-faire teacher, but you're being an authoritative teacher rather than authoritarian teacher, and there's a difference. If I'm authoritarian, I make the rules, you follow my rules because these are the rules. If I'm authoritative, yes, I'm the adult in the classroom and I do have the final say for your safety, but I'm going to listen to you and take what you say seriously. which is really important. And you can get the feel of different classrooms when you walk in them. So this is kind of a visual, and I put a lot of visuals in here for you. When you go back, you can kind of more get a better feel for some of this content by slowly going through some of the visuals and some of the examples that I've provided. So if we break down process, the process can be done in many different ways. It can be independent study, it can be a project, inquiry learning, learning contracts work extremely well. Higher order thinking activities, lecture, new content, one-on-one tutoring, problem-based learning, simulations, individual pace, self-pacing, case studies. So a lot of different types of things, practicing, role-playing. You can come up with a lot of different ways students can get the information that they need. So here are just some activities, tiered activities, interest centers, and you can read through a lot of these as you go through this PowerPoint. The product, transforming learning into non-traditional visual, dramatic, or other forms, and I talked about these. Presenting to real audiences, solving relevant and real-world situations and problems. I went to a school in Richmond that was all project-based, the entire school, and it was amazing to see the types of products that these children were working with. And here are some more examples of products. They can work alone, they can work in small groups, create their own product. A lot of different kinds of things can come out of products-based learning. The instruction is how the curriculum will be taught. When developing the education plan, consider different instructional delivery modifications supported by research. Avoid saying learning styles. We know that the learning styles research has been kind of defunct, that it's a lot more complicated. We're just not auditory, visual, or kinesthetic learners. They're meshed together. We have strength in particular areas. I would lean more toward Howard Gardner's work than I would the three modalities for learning. Not that those are not something that teachers should take into account. My daughter had a teacher once who presented information always in 3 different ways. And she said, if you don't get it from hearing me talk about it, you can read about it here, you can watch this video, you can talk to another person about it, you can talk to a peer. She had some peer interaction set up in her classroom. I see the dogs are inside, they might bark, so with this remote learning, we'll adjust, right? Okay, so here is a way that the peer, this I thought is really kind of nice. The peer learning was structured in one classroom where they put captains at tables. Now you have to be careful about this. You have to make sure that there's flexible learning, and depending on the topic, that everybody has a strength in a different area, that the captains continuously rotate, and that students have opportunities to be leaders as well as those who are being the person that is being helped, okay? But I thought this was a nice way to set up a classroom. Individualization. So think about what we do for college students, credit for prior learning, right? If you had a 4 or 5 on an AP class, most likely you got credit for it. Independent study situations. I've taught independent study with college students. Can we do that with elementary students? Can we do this with middle school students, right? My son, when he was in middle school, got like a 98 on the SOL test that they give at the beginning of the year to see where the students are, to kind of do a pre-test and where they need to focus a lot of their attention. And the teacher said to him, well, you already know most of this, but just try to pay attention. Maybe if he had already scored a 98, they could have given him credit for that learning, and maybe he could have gone into it in a different history class. Compacting the curriculum. A lot of research shows that maybe these year-long classes are not the way to go. Maybe even a semester-long class is not the way to go. Maybe compacting that curriculum into shorter 8-week sessions might be better for students. It seems to be better for college students as we look at the different models for college classes. Multi-grade classes. I did my dissertation research in a blended kindergarten first grade classroom, and you could not tell if they were first graders or kindergartners. They worked at their level. It worked beautifully. I love this classroom. It was in Albemarle County, up by Charlottesville. One-on-one mentoring and tutoring works really well. When my children went to college, I said the best thing you can do is to get a tutor from day one. Don't wait until you're struggling. The strongest students get the tutors from the very beginning. Grouping by ability and achievement. And here, this flexible grouping is extremely important. You want to really pay attention to that, because if you don't flexible group, then you're tracking. And when you track, that's where then students run into trouble, because they get pigeonholed and they typically never get out of that track. So you really, really need to be careful about this. Within class performance grouping, partial day grouping, and making sure that those groups are flexible, and that when you're pre-testing and post-testing continuously to see those children's strengths in different areas. I have a lot of students who tell me, I can do algebra, geometry never made sense. And then you flip that and you have students say, wow, geometry makes so much sense, I just can't do algebra. So that's what I'm talking about, flexible grouping, because that geometry student where geometry was a strength, when you're on that chapter, that student is going to be in the higher group. Where when it's algebra, they might not be in the highest group, and then it's going to flip-flop. That's that flexible grouping. And when you use flexible grouping, students really begin to understand that the individual differences are not I'm better than you, it's just I'm different. I'm a different type of learner. You and I have different strengths, and I think it's a much healthier environment. Acceleration, grade skipping, early entrance to school or college, single subject acceleration, grade telescoping, concurrent enrollment. These are all things that have been tried. Advanced placement, international baccalaureate, credit by exam. These are some things that might sound familiar that are used in the upper grades, and we might want to think about some of them, moving them down into the lower grades, but you have to be careful to keep developmentally appropriateness in your realm. You don't want to skip a child ahead and then they lose out on social and emotional development and their peers. You also have to be careful that the child's not being accelerated because the parent wants to brag at their next neighborhood dinner that their child's now skipped 2 grades, and that does happen as well. Okay, differentiate is not a set of strategies, but rather a way of thinking about teaching and learning. And though I'm sharing some strategies with you, because that's what every first-year teacher, new teacher grabs onto, which is fine, you want to begin adopting the strategies because you believe in the approach is good for students. Good for students, good for teachers, good for society. It's an approach. It's a movement toward differentiation. It's a movement toward expertise in teaching. It is not something you're going to learn overnight. When you go out there and start interviewing, ask about differentiated support. Ask about, do the mentors understand differentiation? Again, here are some steps for planning a tiered activity, and you can kind of look at these on your own, digest them, think about, maybe I'll use this as an example in an essay, short essay I'm going to be asked on the final exam. If I ask you what's a differentiated instructional strategy that you could use with a whole class, okay? And how would you do that? Providing multiple assignments within each unit tailored for students at different levels of readiness, interest, and/or learning style. This is where stations might come into play, and a lot of teachers use stations in their classroom, use differentiated in this way, multiple assignments in a unit. So you develop a unit and you have those three levels. More advanced, more complex, includes a lot of evaluation and synthesis. So you can kind of move down Bloom's taxonomy when you're putting some of these things together. Having high expectations for all students is key. If you do not have high expectations for all students, then that's where you fall into the trap of leaving students, not understanding, causing frustration. Students get angry. They start acting out. In differentiated classroom, there are fewer discipline problems because there's more active learning going on, and there's also more learning that is appropriate, and students are being successful and challenged. That can sometimes be a fine line. They're successful, but they're also being challenged. And this goes along with Vygotsky's principles that you studied in your educational psychology class, Foundations of Education. You'll hear more about Vygotsky as we go through the curriculum. These are key elements of effective differentiated instruction, and this is kind of a summary of things that we've talked about. It's just a summary sheet that you can look at later. Allowing students choice. Choice is key to differentiation. A tic-tac-toe board where you have assignments. It looks like a tic-tac-toe board and they cross off assignments, but they get to choose 3. So there's 9 things they can choose from, and they get to pick, they choose 3. And as a teacher, and I'm not sure if I have a tic-tac-toe, I don't think I have a tic-tac-toe board in here, but as a teacher, if you want everybody to complete one assignment, then that's in the middle. And no matter which way you create your tic-tac-toe, everybody's going to do that core assignment, and then there are other things that they get to choose from to reinforce their learning. Okay, here are some engagement strategies. These are some strategies that you're going to hear again in some of your methods courses. Graphic organizers, jigsaw strategy, a gallery walk. These are really, really popular strategies that are used. A graffiti wall, a corner call. So again, you'll be hearing and learning and practicing some of these strategies in your methods courses. So again, we're back to flexible grouping. I cannot stress enough the importance of flexible grouping. You can do flexible grouping by achievement or readiness in a subject area. You can do it by interest, by learning style, or personal choice. All right, let me decrease my picture here for you. These are raft activities. So this is basically allowing some individual interests to take place. So if I want a student to learn role, audience, format, and topic, then they could pick from these things: language, arts and literature, science, history, math. But they're getting this, they're reading these different things, but you'll see they're focusing on the same thing. So not everybody's reading the same thing. If I like to read about math, I can choose something from math. If I like history, if I like science, if I like language and literature, I can read the New York Times, the op-ed piece. So you see how this raft activity works. Students choose which one they're going to do, and then they have to fulfill these tasks. Differentiation uses flexible grouping. You implement flexible grouping strategies that cluster students. We talked about this already. The key is flexible, 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 flexible. Obviously, flexible is important to me. This probably is a great question to come up on the final exam. Students move in and out of groups after you, the teacher, assesses students' instructional needs, so it's continuous throughout the year. This is called the Freyer model of note-taking, and there's lots of these organizers out there that teachers can use, right? This is teaching reading and science and helping students organize. Now, of course, this is going to depend. This is a little bit for older students or more advanced students in 5th or 6th grade, right? Differentiation isn't assigning more math problems or more reading at the same level to high achieving students. Well, instead of doing 20 problems, you can do 30 tonight. Or when my daughter was ahead, they sent her to the library to do her own research. She hated it. She told the teacher, I'll just do this stuff, even though I already know it. I'd rather be in the classroom helping my classmates work on projects. rather than sit in the library all by myself. She viewed it more of a punishment than of a benefit. So you have to be careful about that. You don't want to focus on students' weaknesses and ignore the student's strength. It's called the deficit model. We often focus on what the child cannot do, what the student cannot do, rather than what can the student do, how much. I always found it amazing that if a student knew 70% of the material, we didn't think they were good enough. Knowing 70% of something is pretty darn good. So if we want them to move forward, if we focus on, okay, you already know all of this, and how can we move it to 75% or 80% of the material based on their existing strengths of what they already know rather than what they don't know? And I have a funny story to tell. My son, he was in a science class, and this was in high school, I think. And he came home and he said, and I'll never live this down. I hear this story all the time. Again, this was my error as a parent responding. He said, I got a 99 on that physics test. And I said, wow, what question did you get wrong? Right? You knew. And he just looked at me, and I knew as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I was like, oh, I fell right into the trap, right? I'm thinking he knew 99% of the material. Would he not be curious what question he got wrong? But no, it just, I wasn't thinking, wow, 99%, that's, a heck of a lot would have been a much better response than, gee, what question did you get wrong? So you can see how hard it is for us to get away from that deficit model because it is ingrained in us in school. So think about that. Think about the strengths rather than the weaknesses. Okay. Parents don't like this either. I remember talking to parents about group learning and differentiation, and it's not requiring students to teach the material that they've already mastered to others, right? Be careful of that. You don't want to make parents think that you're making their child do your job, okay? The best practices that fit differentiation: assessment to inform instruction, and you're all going to get practice in this because this is why we have you do action research. You do assessment so you can change what you're doing. Reflect on that assessment, reflect on your instructional practices, and then change those instructional practices based on student need. Response to intervention. We'll talk a little bit more about this. There are some problems with response to intervention, and this is basically coming out of special education. And I understand the concept, and it was well-intentioned, but it hasn't worked the way that they thought it was going to work. We'll put that's basically providing interventions and seeing how students are responding and then moving them up in the intensity of interventions and before you assess for special education. Hasn't always worked. Teaching for understanding, key. Do they understand, right? Not just memorize, but understand. And how do we get them to understand? Higher order thinking is key. Flexible grouping, there it is again, right? Special education and gifted education, both inclusion and support programs. Inclusion is important. It can be frustrating, but it is really important. Challenge, everybody has to be challenged. If you're not challenged on a daily basis, you're going to get bored and frustrated and just disinterested in what you're doing. And accountability, of course. We have to teach children how to be accountable. How do they become independent learners? We don't create a lot of independent learners in schools, and there are better ways to create those independent learners. We make them accountable, but not by seeing what they do not do, but seeing what they do do. Okay, a nice way to look at a teacher who is ready for differentiated is the teacher-centered approach, not so good for differentiation, right? Are you a teacher who has the formal authority in the classroom? You are the expert. You are the personal model. They need to follow you at all times. I worked with a person who said, I'm the queen in this classroom, and what I say goes. And she would actually have the students call her queen. And because her way was the only right way. If they copied what she did, if they followed her instructions, they would learn, which didn't really happen. Or do you lean more toward a student-centered approach, inquiry-based learning? You're the facilitator of their learning, not laissez-faire. You don't let the students run rampant. You have control over the classroom, right? You set the classroom up. You're firm but fair, but you facilitate the learning. You can be a personal model, and you're a delegator. You delegate responsibilities. Because if you don't delegate responsibilities, if you do everything all the time, they're not going to. You engage the students in cooperative learning. You facilitate that. You delegate. They become facilitators of their learning and of others' learning, and they begin to delegate roles and responsibilities as well. Outcomes that from the research, greater understanding of concepts happens from, and this is what middle school teachers have said, all students experience challenge, the ability to apply concepts, skills to new situations and daily life, so it extends beyond the classroom. And students get excited about learning. They want to be there. They want to go to school. When children want to go to school, something right is happening at school. My 3 children hated middle school. Something was wrong with middle school. They weren't engaged. They didn't enjoy it. They didn't want to go. It was just a drudgery they were trying to get through the day. Students have ownership of the classroom. And students become more independent learners. That's what we want. Students have more evaluative skills. They have more metacognitive skills. They can think about their own thinking. They can, wow, how did I do that? Why did it work? Why didn't it work? And what can I do differently next time? That's metacognition. Students have greater mastery of the content for a longer period of time. They have problem-solving skills because you let them solve problems. And they're able to initiate their own projects. That is really important, okay? I want you to think about these things, and because you're going to answer these questions and post them. What questions and concerns about differentiation do you think teachers are most likely to have? That should be about, not and. Sorry for the typo. What about parents? What questions will they have? What information do you need to respond effectively to questions that parents or students or principals might ask you? Okay, so we are going to get out of the share. And that was a lot of information really quickly, but you may revisit this video. There's good information. You can look through those examples before you post and reflect on those particular questions. Good night, take care, and I'll see you all later. Hope everything's going well. Contact me if you need to.